regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council on Wednesday, July 15th, 2020. It's now 6:30 p.m. We are, of course, meeting by Zoom because of the restrictions of COVID-19. If you are interested in joining us, all of the information about how to join us is available on the agenda page of our city website listed under agendas. And that information is available about how you can submit public comment remotely by emailing the city clerk and by raising your hand during the course of this Zoom meeting. If you have questions during that time, you can always email Allison, who is our city clerk, to figure out how to use the Zoom raise hand motion if it's difficult for you to figure that. So let's start with our roll call, please, Allison.
Councilmember Kandel.
I'm here.
Councilmember Hilmer.
Here.
Councilmember Paulson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hara.
I'm here.
Mayor Way.
I'm here. That moves us to number 2, which is public comment. I'd like to invite members of the public to make a comment and address the council on items that are not on the agenda tonight. We have 2 items mostly on the agenda, which is an update on the city activities on ad hoc committee about the mobile home park, and also a cannabis workshop. So those are the 2 items on the agenda. If you would like to speak on something else, remember in public comment that has not been agendized, we have 3 minutes of public comment per person, and this council cannot take any additional discussion. We may give limited direction to staff. So Allison, is there anyone in the audience who would like to make public comment on an item that's not on the agenda?
I'm looking for any raised hands at this time and any emailed comment, and there is none.
All right, thank you very much. I know we'll have lots of comments on our business items, so we'll get to that quickly. Do we have any? There are no presentations and proclamations, so we'll move to number 4, which is the approval of the consent calendar. Are there any members of the City Council who would like to pull an item from the consent calendar for discussion? It looks like Gabe Paulson would like to. Anyone else? No? And so they'll start with Gabe. Which item would you like to remove?
Not remove, but just, yeah, for discussion, item 4.4, please.
Okay. Item 4.4. Anyone else? All right. Go ahead and tell us what your question is about that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I spoke with the city manager earlier, and my only concern or consideration was, given that cybersecurity is frequently in the media, and it's yet another threat besides COVID and finances and fires, I thought the city manager may just let us know what's going on, because I think that's very useful for both the council and the public to see what steps are being taken.
Would you like to comment on that, Dan Schwartz?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Madam Mayor. So this is a report that was written by the grand jury to highlight some concerns they have about cybersecurity by public agencies throughout the county, or more specifically, the cities and the county itself. The report kind of goes over cybersecurity as an umbrella term across sort of all segments of concern within a city operation. There's a note in the report that Larkspur had an incident. I actually appreciate the opportunity to reiterate what's in our letter, which is the incident in question was that someone in the library figured out a way to get into the back end of the network. It was quickly identified and neutralized, and no damage was done to the network. In addition, we in Larkspur, one of the things we've done is move all our financial data to a cloud-based system. So it's not, that data is not actually on our network. It's probably the data that we would consider the most vulnerable to, and the data that probably might contain information that would require us to then make some sort of disclosure about our network having been attacked or compromised in any way. We've taken a lot of measures over the last few years to remove any data from our network that might be private or proprietary data. So the vast majority, if not all of the data and information now available on our network is actually public record. And by doing so, I think we further reduce the vulnerability for Larkspur. If somebody wants to get into our network, they're going to be looking at things we would have given them had they just asked for them. We also now work through our risk pool because cybersecurity is a risk issue, and we insure the city against a cyber attack in the many different forms it might take. So that we're insured not only against any loss we might experience, but we're insured to make sure the network would come back up and running rather quickly. I reminded Councilmember Paulson when we spoke that we're not Atlanta, which have got a lot of national coverage for choosing not to pay ransomware and then having to spend a rather extraordinary amount of money to rebuild its network. I think if we had to rebuild our entire network from scratch, it would cost us about $100,000. So we're not insuring large sums of money in that respect. We are also insuring against any errors that might occur by the result of a phishing scheme or something like that. But we've put a lot of protocols in place to protect the city against any exposures there. We continue to try to get better. We just recently retained new IT consulting, and they are actually putting best practices manuals together and preparing new training regimens for us so that we'll be even more vigilant in protecting the agency from cybersecurity risk. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and appreciate this opportunity to highlight that.
Was that sufficiently answer your question about that item, 4.4?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Are there any other further questions about the consent calendar? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
That sounds like Dan Hilmer, and
Second.
Gabe Paulson seconds it. Allison, can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Hilmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Haroff,
Yes.
Mayor Way.
Yes. Thank you very much. That moves us to 5, which is the city manager's oral report.
Just a few things. First, I want to let folks know that the Central Marin Fire Authority now has inspectors that are out in the community looking at properties and advising property owners about creating appropriate defensible space. So far, we've gotten a lot of compliments about our inspectors and their demeanor and the way they're approaching this is educate property owners and help them make their properties safe and secure. So I want to thank Chief Martin of the Fire Authority for his direction to his staff to go about that in a really purposeful way that we're getting a lot of positive feedback that it's the right approach for our community. Fire season's upon us and only going to get more significant in terms of our vigilance and concern moving forward. And of course, we also have to be prepared in case we experience any power shutoffs from PG&E this year. The other thing I wanted to highlight, Madam Mayor, is we are still adjusting as we go through our own recovery and reopening efforts, just like the businesses and other aspects of the community. And I'll speak a little more to that as well later, but I particularly want to highlight this early part of the meeting for our patrons of the library that all library due dates were extended into August. I think folks were a little concerned about that. So, and all material, we're asking folks to return it while we're doing our curbside pickup service, which is Tuesday through Saturday from 12 to 4 in the afternoon. With that, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Were there questions to the council on that report? Nope. Seeing none, we'll move to council members' reports and comments. Who would like to go first if they have anything? Seeing none. We haven't been too busy these last couple of weeks with committees.
Well, I'll chime in just very briefly.
Go ahead.
It's Kevin. I just wanted to to acknowledge a group of coastal Miwok Submarine County representatives who put on a very interesting historical presentation, and it really was a focus on history. It wasn't an advocacy piece last Friday, but it was very informative, and I think that it's a reminder of the role that a broad range of our community members have in some of the discussions that we're going to be having in upcoming months. And I just really appreciated it. It was a lengthy presentation, but it was full of great historical photographs and commentary from various participants. Dennis Verdini also was present for the call. I think Councilmember Paulson reached out to the same community in advance of the call separately. But it's an opportunity to really learn in ways that may inform some decisions that we may have coming up.
Kevin, will they be presenting to the countywide ad hoc committee that's looking at the Sir Francis Drake name change, Boulevard name change?
So I'm guessing that representatives of that group will certainly be participating. I think that process is still kind of in a process of evolution to figure out how it's going to go and who's going to participate. But certainly, I would encourage that and did encourage it, and I expect that there will be some representatives. One thing to keep in mind is one of the educational pieces to me is that the Native American population in Northern California is not all unitary. There are various interests who have various different points of views. So figuring out how to make sure that those views can be reflected in our discussions in an appropriate way, that could be a bit of a challenge, but I think it can be done.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have any council member updates? Seeing none, my only update is I wanted to thank Vice Mayor Hara for continuing the tradition of reading the Lincoln's Gettysburg Address on the 4th.
Thank you. I should have mentioned that.
You should have. Yes. We missed our 4th of July parade, which is a huge community booster in our Twin Cities. But at least the Boy Scouts were able to raise the flag at the American Legion Hall. So thank you for doing that and keeping that tradition alive.
And I have to say, that is just one of the highlights of my year, to join the Scouts, raising the flag. We had a very small crowd because we were all trying to comply with our social distancing rules. So we only had, I think, 3 scouts, associate scoutmaster, and me hanging around in the background. But it was a great deal of fun, and I think appreciated by the community. So thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention.
Yes, and my last update is the last about 4 weeks, every other Tuesday, City Manager Dan Schwartz and myself have done a chat on Tuesdays from 11 to 12 online, just to fill in community members. This last week, or this week, yesterday, we had our new librarian and community services director, Franklin Escobedo, and he was there. So that is available online to watch if you want to watch. And we're going to try to just continue doing this every 2 weeks or so, depending on the interest. All right, that brings us to public hearings, and we have none, which brings us to number 8. We have 2 business items. I know a lot of you in our audience are here for that. So 8.1A is the Mobile Home Park Ad Hoc Committee update. I want to know, and who of the 2 committee members would like to give that update? Looks like Gabe Paulson.
Yeah, I think we can both chime in, but I think Gabe has given some thought to the order of things.
All right.
Great. All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. So yeah, I'll just get us started, and Kevin can jump in and certainly take over here. So I'm coming to the council tonight primarily with 2 goals. The first is to report back on our activity in the last 6-7 months. And secondly, to look for guidance from the council on the role of the ad hoc committee moving forward. So on the first part, as many of you know, this issue was around before the ad hoc committee formed. Former Mayor Ann Morrison had engaged with the mobile home parks and was looking for a solution to a variety of issues. Vice Mayor Harif and I started on the committee in December, and what had happened at that time was staff had made a recommendation to have a public hearing to look at rent control as a possible option for the park. And since then, we've met several times. We've identified the stakeholders in both the Marin Park RV Park and the Marin Park Mobile Home Park, and then the Golden Gate Mobile Home Park. So two different parties. And we tried to ensure that there were both tenants and owners at the table, and even within that group, perhaps long-term and short-term leases, so we got good representation. I would say to date, the main accomplishments have been a focus on the issues. So what started off as discussions about habitability and about communication and various things has narrowed primarily to a discussion of rent and rent mitigation or addressing rent. The Golden Gate Mobile Home Park decided that they were not interested, that they have not come to any subsequent meetings, though they attended the first one, and did not feel that this applied to them. The main accomplishment was the Marin Mobile Home Park was going to increase the rent by $75 a month approximately, depending on prior rents for its various tenants on June 1st. And that was deferred for 2 months until August 1st. And then in the past week, we had another meeting where we looked again at that, and the end decision was to defer that once again for 2 months from August 1st until October 1st. So there has been movement on that, and the Marin Park owners have also looked at various ways to ensure that there's a safety net, primarily the MEHT program. And we can discuss that a little bit further. I don't know the details entirely. I tried to look at it, as did the Vice Mayor, and in any event, some mobile home park owners do not think that's an adequate safety blanket and still think that there may be need for more assistance or more control. Sort of the last part of this is, given COVID and everything since we started in December, I would identify a few really critical factors to what we think might be the next steps. One of them is pending legislation in the state of California. So there's Senate Bill 999 and Assembly Bill 2895. So one of them would impose statewide rent control on mobile homes. I think that originates in Southern California, and the other one would end all long-term leases. Both pieces of legislation have passed their respective houses and would currently be debated right now in the California Assembly and Senate, but there's a 2-week delay, so the June 13th meeting won't happen until June 27th. But what I believe is that all this legislation has to be decided by August 31st. And the reason I bring up those dates is because the rents postponement is until October 1st. So there may well be statewide resolution or understanding of whether there's rent control or not. And we think by the end of August. Of course, another very obvious factor is that our own city has been impacted. Our staff and council resources are more strained because of COVID and the financial impact. And then, as both Kevin and I are members of the Small Business Chamber, there's a increasing awareness of the impact on small businesses and small family businesses like Marin Park and their fragility in all this. So with that, I can offer the opinion that given the state legislation, city constraints, and the number of owners, that my recommendation would be that we consider or continue to pursue a long-term agreement. But the 4 options that seem to be on the table are what I just recommended, which is working with the stakeholders to reach some sort of long-term mutual agreement. The second would be pursuing some form of rent control. The third would be to simply end the ad hoc committee, and there may be another option, so I leave that as open. And with that, I yield to the Vice Mayor.
Excellent report. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that was a great summary of where we are. And I just want to start by expressing appreciation for all of the stakeholders who have been engaged in the conversations over time. It's kind of a bad habit of all of us to say that these have been challenging times to make progress on a wide variety of subjects, and this is certainly one of them too, because of other distractions. But we have been having meetings. We have been engaging with folks. Um, it has always been my view that subject to resolution of some of the legislative issues that are percolating up in Sacramento, that the best outcome for all of the stakeholders is a long-term agreement once the landscape created by the legislation is established. And unfortunately, that's been a moving target. We're just not there yet. So I'm hoping we can continue with the ad hoc group to not just facilitate discussions, but provide some assistance in working up a long-term agreement when we do have that landscape settled a little bit better, and meet the interests of all the parties involved. So I say that as an expression of commitment to continuing the process to the extent that the council desires us to do that. But I think Gabe is right. Part of why we want to have this discussion tonight is either to have the council affirm going forward in that way or provide us other direction.
Okay. So I'd like to open this up for questions of our ad hoc committee members before we go any further. It sounds like Gabe has provided a real overview of what the work's been done and some upcoming deadlines, as well as some upcoming legislation. So are there questions you'd like to ask before we engage the public comment on this? Yes, Dan Hilmer?
Yes, could you give us some sense of temperature of the stakeholders relative to the range of alternatives you described, and where a consensus might be lie or implied by the work you've done?
Yeah, I can take a stab. I think that many of them are on this call, so I'll let them speak for themselves. My impression, has been the last meeting, which occurred only a few days ago, was, a fairly high temperature. Clearly COVID, and there are retirees in the park, and limited income people, and then the park owners themselves, in my opinion, have been very willing partners and making a significant effort. But the challenge is it's very hard. It's been very hard to find a middle ground. I feel very encouraged that twice the rent was postponed, and that seems to give 4 months of relief to people who really asked for it. But we've said we're kind of punting. This is, we're looking for a long-term solution, and some people have expressed frustration saying rent control or bust. Others are saying something different. So I think hopefully public comment will give you more clarity. But in short, I think the temperature has gotten a bit higher because we're living in more stressed times.
Well, you both mentioned a long-term agreement as a preference. How do the stakeholders to date, what have they expressed relative to working on such a long-term agreement? I'm referring to the owners and the renters. Are they both? Would they both like to pursue such an agreement?
The owners seem very willing. The renters, some have, some haven't. I believe that the challenge here is really part of the history, as I understand it, is there was a bit of shock with the increases, and people are looking for some sense of security, which is understandable. And my hope would be that the long-term agreement would be binding enough and would be clear enough where both parties would feel that they can remain solvent.
Any other questions at this point? Okay. Allison, can we see how many people in the audience have raised their hands? You're all welcome to raise your hand to speak on this matter. I just want to get a sense on how many we have for what our timing will be. So if you're in the audience and listening and you would like to make a comment on this matter, please raise your hand now so I can get a sense of how many are waiting to talk. Looks like we have 2 hands raised. So I think we can probably do our usual, which is a 3-minute timer. Are you good for that, Allison?
I believe so. City Manager Schwartz was going to turn the timer on for us.
You're juggling a lot of roles, I know. We have 2 attendees who have raised their hand, and we may have additional ones who are calling in. So can we have our first attendee? All I see are, on my end, all I see are hands. So just, you'll need to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, our first speaker will be Bridget Gleason. It's your turn for public comment.
Welcome, Bridget. And now I see your name here. Great.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to address you, and I will be briefer than 3 minutes. I just want to say that we are committed to working together with the owners and with the ad hoc committee, but we don't have a lot of optimism around the ability of a long-term agreement to be successful, nor have other mobile home parks throughout the state had very much success with that. I understand that we have a speaker from the Mobile Home Owners Association at the very early end of this, before we ever even had an ad hoc committee, who talked about how successful the agreement is in one particular situation. But Joan is unable to be here tonight. She has gotten very involved with the Mobile Home Park Resident Owners Association that represents mobile home parks throughout California, a GSMOL. Has had a lot of conversations with them around the fact that that has not proved to be a successful strategy from the resident owner's perspective in most instances around the state. We are hopeful, obviously, about the state legislation, which may in fact obviate the need to even continue anything other than working together on other things, which we have started doing. I worked with Christine this week around various issues around security. We had meetings in the park of the residents around security. We're working on putting together both a neighborhood watch program and an emergency response team, and the ownership of the park has supported us in that. But we need to have something much more concrete around legislation, whether it's state-based or locally based. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Are there comments on that? It sounds like it's some of the direction that you had already mentioned, Gabe. Yeah. Looks like we have one more hand raised, and that's Mr. Carroll. Could we unmute Mr. Carroll?
All right, Mr. Carroll, it's your turn for public comment.
Thank you, and thank you, Council. Just a couple of points. I agree with the previous speaker that long-term agreements don't, quite frankly, look promising. And of course, I think both members are correct, council members are correct. It's obvious on the city's part and ours to wait and see what happens in the state legislature. But I would prefer you not limit the options, but keep all the options that were mentioned back in the staff report back in December be left on the table. I know the ad hoc meeting was recorded, I believe. And I think if you go back and look at it, you'll see that the park owners very clearly stated they were not going to extend the deadline for the rent increase during the meeting. And I asked that question of her very specifically. And then it wasn't until after the meeting was over. I assume she consulted with family members. I think the presence of the 2 council members and the city manager and your reactions to her flat refusal to extend, I think, influenced her decision to now extend it to October. I am one of the people that has been pushing on this, but I think the October deadline gives us a lot more breathing room. But I would like to see all options on the table in the direction that the whole council gives to the committee. And that was, again, something I brought up, suggesting that it come back to you and we get something preferably in writing as to what your direction is, so that there is no gray areas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Are there any, I don't see any other hands in the audience. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter? Or Allison, have we received any email comments?
Thank you. There is no further public comment.
All right, so I will close the public comment time on this and bring it back to the City Council for some further discussion. It sounds like you have put forward, moving forward, that we should monitor the statewide rent stabilization for mobile home parks. It sounds like you still want to continue meeting with the ad hoc committee and hoping to create a long-term agreement, and continue working with the committee to have the extension of the rent increase to October 1st. Was there anything I missed?
Madam Mayor, if I may, just to add, we will be meeting with the tenants tomorrow, and perhaps a simpler way to frame this for the council is whether the council believes there's anything we should take off the table. So clearly, we're looking to meet tomorrow. We know there's legislation in a month and a half. If there's any caveats or concerns or that you want to give us or guidance, that would be appreciated.
Councilmember Candela, you took yourself off mute. Was there something you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, I had a question. For the potential agreement, are there any terms that are drawn up that there's mutual consent over? Are we close to an agreement, or are we still pretty far away?
Yeah, thank you. I believe that the template was provided by the owners. They have an advocate, in the mobile home community, and it was from Rancho Cucamonga, and there might be a second one. I forget the city. So there are templates. To answer your question briefly, there has not been any material discussion about terms. I think we've really come to, the core question, which is what to do about rent. And the owners have expressed, a great flexibility, saying that, we can discuss anything, we can try anything. So in that sense, I don't think the discussion has even begun. We sort of bifurcated the current situation into short-term and long-term relief. And I think we've achieved short-term relief with the 2-month, extensions twice. I don't think long-term relief has been really, meaningfully put on the table yet.
If I could, Mayor Way, I think that's all exactly right. And I have to stress again, the challenge that, or a big challenge that we have is the uncertainty about the landscape in Sacramento, about what we will have to work with. I think it is inevitable that whatever actions we take, if any, will be constrained by what the legislature does. And we don't know what that will be. So in terms of talking about specific terms beyond the kind of short-term relief that we've seen, it's just very, very difficult at this point to talk about a long-term solution, which we want to do, but it's tough when we don't have that certainty from our state legislation.
That seems to be the issue also we had last September while we were waiting for rent controls to come from the state, but it unfortunately excluded mobile home parks by the time we finally received that.
Yeah, and the other problem, of course, and I don't want to use this as the usual excuse for everything, which is COVID-19, because I don't know that that's true, but certainly dealing with economic uncertainties that have been the result of having to deal with the pandemic. It plays into it, and it's hard to predict how that's all going to work itself through.
So Kevin, would your recommendation be to continue the ad hoc committee work on an ongoing basis, particularly after hearing what the results of this pending legislation will be?
My view is that we are here to be a resource for the stakeholders. And as long as the stakeholders wish to have us provide ourselves as a resource, I think both Gabe and I are willing and ready to do that. And I haven't heard anybody say that they're not interested in having us do that. As Gabe mentioned, we are having a meeting tomorrow. We have had meetings on and off with some regularity, not complete, but I think we stand ready to be a resource for the stakeholders. And until the stakeholders tell us they don't feel that's productive, then we're ready to keep going.
Do you think, Gabe, that that's sufficient direction for your ad hoc committee at this point?
Yeah, I maybe what would make it clear is if Councilman Hilmer and Candell and yourself, indicated to us that there's nothing you want to take off the table. We're willing to work with what's there, and that's subtraction argument. And in the affirmative part of what we're working on is towards a long-term agreement pending the August 31st decisions, at which point we can briefly report back to the council and say it passed, what do we do, or it didn't pass, what do we do? So, I mean, I think we're again somewhat of an interim position, if that's not too long of an answer.
I think that's pretty clear that we're in an interim position waiting for legislation and direction from current legislation. We might need to revisit this then after that legislation passes and give you further thoughts. But Dan Hilmer, you have some? And then
Actually, Scott had his hand up first.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I just, in my experience, I think it would be a mistake to take the long-term discussions off the table, only because you may find yourself in a situation where it's now September, rents are going to go up in October, and you're crammed and you have to try to rush something in. So I think it's fantastic that we've got these short-term extensions to give us some breathing room. I would hate to waste that breathing room. I think it would make sense to continue to try and work on a long-term agreement, even if it's just a term sheet, even if it's just contingent on the legislation passing or not passing. At least we can get some consensus of, hey, these are the things that we agree on. These are the things we still have to work on, and try to move closer to that. That would be my thought.
And Dan Hilmer, what's your thought on that?
Scott covered the issue quite well. Thank you.
All right. So, Kevin?
And just to be clear, I think certainly and I don't want to speak for Gabe, but I think he's likely to agree that is the most desirable outcome. And we want to be able to work on that. We have, as Gabe mentioned, some exemplars which may or may not be entirely relevant to what we want to accomplish here. But it's always been my strong view from the very first time we had a meeting that we need to work on an agreement of the parties and focus our efforts to the best of our ability on reaching that goal. So I'm 100% for that.
So it sounds like our direction is consistent with what your presentation was. I would think that after this pending legislation passes or does not pass or is amended, maybe we can have a further update after that, which might be at the end of August or maybe early September, depending upon how the legislature works.
That's absolutely fine.
Sound good? And Dan Hilmer, you saying something?
One request for any clarification Sky might want to offer at this point, given the constraints the city might be operating under. I know we want all things for the best things for everybody in this, but we might have some limits to our ability to provide things past a certain point.
I don't have anything to add on that point other than we've discussed previously that, you know, there are legal options available to the city council to regulate rents. There are practical limitations on, there are both legal and practical limitations on what the city can really accomplish in that regard. But but I think that, to reiterate Vice Mayor Haroff's statements, there's, you know, the ad hoc committees there as a resource to help facilitate some agreement between the tenants and the park operators. And if that fails, to come back to the council to reconsider the legal options that have been identified for the council. And those may have changed by the time that conversation occurs based on the state legislation that's moving forward.
Okay,
Thank
I think that sums it up. Do you feel the ad hoc committee, you feel as if you have direction?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, community members who continue to participate in this role. That brings us to 8.1, which is our council workshop tonight. It's local consideration for cannabis industry operations within the city of Larkspur. The city council is to conduct a workshop to discuss local consideration for cannabis operations within the city of Larkspur and provide directions to staff. So this is how we're going to run the workshop tonight. I know many of you in the audience are here for that purpose. We're going to start, there have been several emails that have come in and questions about potential conflict of interest. So to address it straight off before we get started, I've invited our city attorney, Sky Woodruff, to speak about that and his analysis about potential conflict of interest thoughts. After that, Councilmember Scott Candell, who joined us in December, would like to give an introduction to himself and to address why this workshop was requested. And then we will go to the city manager's and staff report. And then from there, there'll be questions from the city council if there are any, and then we'll go to public comment. So as you know, the order of events, we'll be doing that. So hang on if you have public comment, but we'd like to take on right ahead some of the concerns and questions the community has had about potential conflict of interest. So with that, I will ask City Attorney Sky Woodruff to speak with us.
Thank you, Mayor. I will do my best to keep relatively short a complicated topic. As you mentioned, the city has received several comments from members of the public expressing concern that Councilmember Candell has a conflict of interest with regard to the topic of this workshop that would require him to recuse himself. As those comments note, he owns a law firm that represents businesses in the cannabis industry and is the CEO of a company that tests and certifies cannabis products. I have reviewed the applicable law and discussed the potential impact of allowing cannabis retailers in Larkspur on Councilmember Candell's business interests. And based on that review and my conversation with Councilmember Candell and his due diligence in that regard, my opinion is that under the Fair Political Practices Commission's regulations that govern conflicts of interest under the Political Reform Act, that he does not have a conflict of interest that would require him to recuse himself tonight. I do want to note that, and I will explain, but I do want to note that only the FPPC can ultimately make that determination. And I've advised both Councilmember Candell and the City Council about that, but I can offer you my opinion as the City Attorney as a basis for proceeding tonight. Under the FPPC's regulations, there's a 4-step process that must be used to evaluate whether a council member's financial interest would result in what we refer to as a disqualifying conflict. 2 of those steps are ambiguous in this context, but I'm going to go through them for just as best I can so that everyone has a little bit of context for understanding how this test flows. One of the steps asks whether it's reasonably foreseeable that a council decision would have a material effect on a member's financial interests. Here, there are a number of intermediary events that would have to occur, many of which are completely out of the city's control before allowing cannabis retailers would have any effect on Councilmember Candell's business interests. So just to state that slightly differently, even if, since this is only a workshop tonight, and I will touch on that next, even if at some point down the road, the City Council allowed for the operation of cannabis retailers and some of them opened, there are still between here and there are a number of events that would have to occur before there would be any financial effect that could possibly occur to Councilmember Candel's business interests. Additionally, as I noted, no final decisions are intended to be made tonight as a result of the workshop. This item is meant to provide the City Council with information about this topic and ascertain whether the council is interested in further exploration of the possibility of allowing cannabis retailers. It's not to make a final decision tonight or even necessarily to immediately move forward in one direction or another. It's not clear whether Councilmember Candel's participation in such a discussion constitutes a decision within the meaning of the FPPC's regulations, and that's a necessary element for a conflict to exist. Basically, there are some advice letters from the FPPC generally around this topic, but they have not issued definitive guidance on whether or not a preliminary discussion like this would definitively constitute a decision. Nevertheless, for the purposes of my analysis, I assumed that Councilmember Candel's participation would constitute a decision and that it's reasonably foreseeable that allowing cannabis retailers would have an effect on his business interests. Even assuming those two things, under the FPPC regulations, the effect on his business interests must be material, and the regulations provide a test for what materiality means. In this context, materiality is whether the decision will affect the business entity's annual gross income, expenses, or asset value in an amount equal to or more than $1 million, or 5% of the entity's gross revenues. So just to state that again, in a little bit plainer terms, basically allowing cannabis businesses would have to result in more than $1 million of revenue to Councilmember Candel's businesses, or an increase in the income of those businesses by 5% or more. I discussed this standard with Councilmember Candel and whether or not allowing cannabis retail in Larkspur could potentially generate that much revenue for either of his businesses. He noted to me immediately, and I feel it's important to also note that he would not intend to provide services to businesses in Larkspur, even if he were allowed to do so. But for the purposes of this analysis, even if he did, after reasonable due diligence, given the timing allowed, he concluded and informed and discussed with me that the financial effects would be below the materiality standards that are established by the FPPC. So since that is an essential element of the test, my conclusion is that since even if there would be a financial impact, it would not be material. He does not have a conflict under the regulations that would preclude him from participating in the meeting tonight. I did also want to note, because some of the comments also mentioned this, that the City Council has adopted its own policy on the conduct of its members. And that policy provides that members should conduct themselves in a manner that does not raise a, quote, reasonable perception or belief, unquote, that there is a conflict of interest or an abuse of their positions. As you noted, Councilmember Candel is going to make his own statement about why he believes that his participation in the workshop is for the public interest and not for his own financial interests. There's no evidence that's been presented to me that would suggest that he has any other motives other than to pursue the public interest in raising this discussion. As I noted and just finished discussing, my review of the FPPC regulations lead me to believe that he does not have a qualifying conflict of interest. So there are a number of reasons to conclude that although there might be some concern about his motivations in participating in the discussion, that there's not necessarily evidence to support a reasonable perception or belief that he has a conflict of interest under the council's policy. Ultimately, though, as I've noted to the City Council in the past, the council is responsible for collectively enforcing that policy. So it's up to the council to determine whether or not it believes that there is evidence to support a reasonable perception that his participation would result in a conflict or an abuse of his position. That concludes my summary. I'm happy to take any questions from the council about this before we move on.
Thank you, Sky, and thank you for sending the attorney work product, which is confidential to us earlier about explaining this in great detail. Does City Manager Dan Schwartz have anything else to add to this at the moment?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So are there questions of Sky before we move on about this? Dan Hilmer, did you raise your hand? Yeah.
No, Madam Mayor, and I thank Sky for addressing the council operating principles in his comment.
And just a reminder, we're not voting on any ordinance tonight. There is no ordinance presented. This is a workshop, which is a different context, as Attorney Sky Woodruff described. Kevin, do you have a question? No?
No, not a question. Just to reiterate just what was said, this is a workshop. It's fair to bring it up. Obviously, this is an issue that the council has addressed previously. But I don't think there's any reason why we can't proceed tonight with the way things have been outlined. If we're presented with the possibility of voting on an ordinance later on, we can address that in that context. But I'm perfectly happy to move forward tonight.
Do I have consensus on that from the rest of you? The other four of you, just nod if you do. Sounds like we have consensus on that. So thank you again, Sky, for that outline. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
That brings us to Councilmember Kendall. Would you like to address the community and the council on this matter?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me start with the conflict issue. Let me explain the situation. I have a law firm in Santa Fe. It's a cannabis law firm. I've been a cannabis attorney for about 20 years. I represent all different aspects of the cannabis industry, people going for permits, licenses, things of that nature. I am also the CEO of a cannabis testing facility in Novato. I am doing both of these because I believe in cannabis. I think it's an amazing plant. I think it's got medicinal properties. 20 years from now, I think it's going to be curing diseases that we can't even imagine of right now. But as far as the conflict goes, I have spoken to the city attorney about this. It is riddled with potential conflicts as this issue potentially moves forward. I will be consulting with the city attorney along the way, whether there are votes or meetings or whatever has to be done. And I would have no problem recusing myself for any issues that come up if there is a conflict. Having said that, I want to take the focus off me because this is not supposed to be about me. This is what's in Larkspur's best interest. And I wanted to mention why I asked the mayor to put this on the agenda. And there are a couple of reasons. The first is we just went through our budget discussion, and we were at $2.7 million in the hole for this year. We had some very painful cuts that we had to do. We had to get rid of positions. We had to furlough staff. And we were still about $1.7 million short. And we were able to come up with some one-time rabbit out of the hat solutions to get us through this year. We took $525,000 out of the occupancy tax, the hotel tax. That's a one-time thing. That's not going to be there next year. We got $700,000 by restructuring the pension obligations. That's not going to be there next year. We got $500,000 out of the general fund without going below our threshold that we'd like to keep there as a reserve fund. That's not going to be an option next year. So we're going to have some really tough decisions next year. What we're going to face is basically, do we want to cut our services, which with the skeleton staff that we have now would be very tough, and we're talking, fire and police and things that we really don't want to cut, or are we going to raise revenues? And we can raise revenues by raising taxes, and we can have a COVID bond if we think the public is in support of that. I don't think they would be, but we could have said, okay, we need $2 million from the public, everybody chip in. Or we could try to find an alternative revenue source that we don't have right now. And my understanding from my knowledge of the industry, if we did have a cannabis dispensary, we could expect somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million per year into our general fund for that. And for a city the size of ours, that's probably 7% of our budget. I think we're about a $15, $16 million budget. that's not something that I want to just turn my head and say, forget about it. Now, keep in mind, aside from that, I mean, I would never support something I didn't think was in the best interest of Larkspur. I have, 2 kids in middle school. I'm not going to support something I think is going to be harmful to kids. I think Larkspur has an opportunity here to really be a leader in Marin County. And the reason is because we have industrial property that is right off 101, so it has access to people throughout Marin. It has access by the ferry. It has access to smart trains. We have Marin General here. We have cancer institutes here, where people are being diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor says you need cannabis, and they say, oh, sorry, you got to drive up to, Cotati to get your cannabis.
So Scott, let's
yeah.
That looks like it's something that we can engage in with the entire council in a little bit after we hear public comment. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of tell people who you were and why this was brought up on the agenda. And then let's go into the details of those other things once we've heard public comment.
Can I ask for a clarifying question, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
You're speaking to a couple of things where I would expect you would have data to support your comments. So I'm hoping that as you state things like expected revenues to the city's general fund, you'll have supporting evidence to such a statement.
Correct.
And I think that's what we'll do when we engage with the public comment, when people will be asking those questions too. So is there anything that you think further to clarify the reason why this was asked to be added to the agenda?
Well, the reason it was added to the agenda was, first of all, for the budget issues.
Okay.
And the second, because I think it's in our community's best interest to have it here.
All right, thank you.
And I can go into details later if you'd like.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
All right, any follow-up questions about those, our two presenters, before we get into the meat of this workshop?
Well, I would just like to ask you just quickly, what local Marin or even Sonoma examples can you name just to cite where you've seen this sort of revenue generation to the local jurisdiction? San Rafael just went through this and they reported that they could not meet such goals.
San Rafael doesn't have a dispensary. San Rafael has delivery, and San Rafael has different types of permits, maybe manufacturing. They don't generate the same types of revenue. If you look at Cotati, where they have Mercy Wellness, those are the numbers that they approximate. If you look at some of the dispensaries in Oakland or San Francisco, they have large revenues. The thing about the expected revenues here, and let me just clarify, the reason for this workshop, what I would like to do is I'd like to get the issues from the public, the concerns from the public on the table, and then hopefully direct staff to answer the questions instead of it coming from me. I mean, I'm happy to give you the statistics, but I think staff could do a neutral report and say, hey, does it increase teen use, for example, if you have a dispensary? How much revenue can you raise? Is it going to be safety issues if you have a dispensary? I think we have enough data now, because it's been around so long, staff could find that information relatively easily. So I'm happy to give you my answers to those, but the way I hope and envision this will go is that we'll find out what are council's concerns and questions, and then have staff do a neutral report so we can get some data that way.
Okay, so let's launch into this because we have a lot of people in the audience, and I see where your direction that you're interested in going. Let's see what the temperature of the community is and whether they want us to continue to pursue this or not pursue this. So let's begin with City Manager's staff report on matter 8.1.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. As was already noted, our recent budget situation has caused Councilmember Candela and myself to have had several conversations off and on about what the options are around the cannabis industry. In addition, Every year I give the council an overview of the state of the city financially when you have your strategic planning workshop. And one of the things we talk about are potential revenue streams, and excise taxes around cannabis were mentioned as a possibility as far back as your most recent strategic planning workshop. So staff's had this on a list of potential workshop issues that the council might want to visit this year. After conferring with the mayor, brought this forward for discussion today. The challenge that we have is that the data that exists in the cannabis industry isn't readily published on every single website out there. It's something you have to go work for. And so what we really wanted to do, and I echo what was said earlier, is find out from the council what avenues and aspects of this issue you might be interested in exploring so that we could then invest our time and resources appropriately. The information is out there. We just need to work a bit to get it, and we can do that for you once the issue's been refined and the direction's been given by council. We did want to complement the work we did for you at your 2017 workshop on this issue by giving you sort of our 10,000-foot overview of where things stand right now, and what we thought are probably the topic areas that the council may want to discuss during this workshop. So it's already been mentioned that revenue potential is one of the driving interests in terms of bringing this issue before the council. I just want to remind the council that there's several aspects to the revenue question when it comes to the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry, like any business, is subject to the existing Bradley-Burns-based sales tax system that's in place for the state of California. So even if you authorized the cannabis industry, in particular retail, to operate within the city, but chose not to go the next step, which is to discuss an excise tax on that product, you would receive tax on the sale of goods. You'd receive the 1% Bradley-Burns-based sales tax that the city receives. In addition, our Measure B sales tax would be applied. So you'd have another 3/4 cent sales tax that would be added to the sales. But the cities that I think are likely bringing the money that makes this industry a revenue contributor are the ones that choose to have an excise tax, which for simplified purposes here is essentially a sales tax on that good. And we did look around just to see the various examples across the state, and there's a range of anywhere from about 5 to 15%. The 10 seems to be a common number of the excise tax that's applied by communities. That's on top of a 15% tax that the state of California is applying on the product. So one of the significant issues that we did want to highlight, and so we provided you with some reading material, is there are some indications, and you saw the press clipping that we gave you, that the tax structure that's currently in place across the state may be actually incentivizing individuals to go participate in the illegal sale of marijuana product, because the legal sale, the taxation system may be creating a barrier to entry for those businesses. And so that is something that, if we want to proceed further, merits some discussion and would probably warrant the council considering retaining the services of someone who's an economic development expert who could advise us about what type of tax structures mean in terms of the success of these types of businesses entering into the community. There are previous workshops, a significant topic that's been brought up, and you can see it in a lot of the written comment, is concern about the impact on youth and the use of the product by youth. I'm not in a position today to tell you that I have what data is saying about what the legalized cannabis industry's impact has been on the use of the product by underage individuals. And in sort of casting our net out, we looked at a handful of reports on the internet, we didn't see that there was really any conclusive information about the effect of the legalized industry on the use by underage individuals. What we can report is that in casting our net out and speaking to some of the agencies who have already done research in this area, there isn't anecdotally a lot of evidence that the legalized industry is the driving factor for use within the youth community either. But that's anecdotal, and we would want to spend some time trying to collect data for you if you want to move forward with this topic. Another area that's been raised many times is just general impact on public safety. And here, I think one of the critical things to note about the legalized industry is we're not seeing reports in California that the legalized industry has faced significant incidents of crime or been the reason that there's been significant incidents of crime. Again, though, it may be that because barriers to entry remain high for this industry, that the illegal industry, which does still have some aspects of public safety concern being reported around the state, it may be that that it's being exacerbated by that barrier to entry question.
Dan, could you pause for just a moment? Because I think Dan Hilmer has
Sure.
a question on these two matters that you've been outlining.
Just to go back to the taxing, layers of taxing that we can identify, could you please speak to how the county also adds a tax to this at the point of sale when I guess if the customer, whether they have a medical card or not, they have to have a county card or a certification to not have that county tax added to their purchase cost.
For recreational purchases.
I think on medical too. What I'm getting at is the state, county, and then we add an excise tax. What does that do to the market position of the establishment? Because it feeds into the conversation Dan is having about when people decide not to participate in the legal market.
Legal market. I don't know if he has all that information because we haven't done that
Well,
investigation.
he would know what the county requires.
I have to apologize that part of Councilmember Hilmer's question broke up, so I'm not 100% certain what was asked.
He's asked.
What does the county require at the point of sale, including requirements for a medical county Marin cannabis medical card? If they don't have that card, there's a layer of taxation that's, I understand, is added as well, in addition to the state or any local excise tax. And then I'm interested in how that relates to the market and might be discouraging people from participating in the legal market.
So I have to apologize to Councilmember Hilmer. I wasn't prepared to bring an answer to that question, and I don't have or know the answer to that. I can see if my colleagues who are here to help support me when we get to Q&A know the answer. Otherwise, we could try to get it during the workshop, but we'll also make note if we're moving forward with this topic, those are questions that you would like answered.
So you, Councilmember Paulson, you had a question on these first two areas of the staff report?
Yeah, just very simply, I understand that there's a real range of uncertainty here on the financials, but if I understand it correctly, if we were only looking at Bradley Burns in Measure B to realize 1 million, we would have to be selling about $57 million of product in Larkspur. And if there's an excise tax of 10%,
yes, I think that's
it would be about.
approximately.
I just wanted to establish that there's a range of gross sales which is known based on the tax base.
right, why don't you continue with the staff report, because it looks like we have two more things, which are potential locations within Larkspur and cannabis in Marin.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So potential locations within Larkspur is a topic that in past workshops has been of significant interest and focus from the council and the community. State law requires that the city establish a buffer of 600 feet around schools if and not authorize the cannabis businesses to operate within that buffer. So we provided you with a map that shows that buffer in Larkspur. The council has, as a practice and as an unwritten policy, with respect to the sale of age-restricted products, also added parks to the 600-foot buffer. So in order to ensure that you have information, should be the choice you want to make if you proceed with exploring and potentially introducing the cannabis industry, we provided you with what that 600-foot buffer looks like. We did want to note, though, and we emphasized this point when the council had its workshop in 2017, that that policy or that practice has really focused on the fact that children are in our parks, and I think staff would make an argument that not all parks are created equal, that we have a handful of parks in Larkspur that you and I could sit in for a couple of days and never see a child in that park. And the one that stands out most to me is Hamilton Park, which most folks don't even realize is a public park. And that's important and significant because that Hamilton Park in Bon Air Park, which is the park that has the docks down into the water, are the two parks that are constraining exploring whether or not cannabis and businesses could locate near Marin General. And given in the past there's been interest in possibly linkage between Marin General and medical cannabis, we wanted to point that out to the council, that might be something to discuss if you want to discuss about specific locations in Larkspur. And then consistently, the council's asked us to keep them informed of what's going on throughout Marin. So we provided you with an updated table that talks about the different aspects of the industry as you'll find it throughout Marin. So what we'd like to do tonight is have a general conversation between and among the council and the community, and the council then to decide whether it wants to give in staff. And we identified possible things to give us direction on at the end of the workshop. One is whether you ignore this topic or you want to maintain the status quo. And a reminder, the status quo at this time is that personal grow indoors is allowed, and or personal cultivation indoors is allowed, and deliveries are allowed. You can order product and have it delivered to your residence or your address in Larkspur. If you do want us to explore this issue further, we'd like direction on the topics and the questions. So Councilmember Henn, that's our first direction of something he's interested in that he'd like us to explore and report back on. And then some general direction about the type of experts we might want to bring in to provide information and advice. And then, we need to talk about a little bit either tonight or going forward what our engagement process would look like with the community. Some cities have created exploratory ad hoc committees to go through an engagement process. Some communities, it's happened at council meetings, and those are all options for the council to talk about. And then the other thing the council may want to talk about even as soon as now is whether you want to just use the ballot box as the means to gauge community interest in this topic. we've seen some communities. There's 2 in Napa County that are essentially putting the question in front of their voters in conjunction with a tax. So simultaneously, do you want to allow this use in our community? And if you do want to allow it, are you supportive of an excise tax on the use? And that's certainly an approach that the council may want to be thinking of now or later in this discussion. So with that, Madam Mayor, I have with me the Planning Director, Neil Toft, and City Attorney Sky Woodruff, and we're here to answer any questions that you or the community may have, or at least take notes on questions you'd want answered going forward.
Okay, thank you. So just to summarize where we've been as a city council in the past after Proposition 64 passed, was we have had 4 different conversations and meetings about cannabis, and the last one being September of 2019, in which the outcome was, as you said, individual indoor grows are permitted, delivery is permitted, but we unanimously at that time decided not to provide retail cannabis ordinance to allow retail cannabis. Is that correct? So that's where we stand now, our current law.
Well, if I may, Madam Mayor, I do want to just make clear a lot of those decisions were made in 2017 and then in 2019 because you had put a temporary moratorium in place. You were required by law to formalize that. And in fact, I think it's really important to make that point because even when that was happening, we had folks asking, does this mean the council can never visit this topic again? And I think it's really important to say we were clear at that time, no, it's just that the council's reached a deadline to turn what was temporary into something that's permanent.
Okay.
And permanent in this sense is not something that's can't be changed by the council.
Okay, thank you. And that was in September 2019. So are there questions that the city council members have?
That's correct.
Staff report. Not yet. Oh, Vice Mayor Haroff does.
Yeah. I can't figure out whether I should be raising my hand or pressing the button that says I'm raising my hand. But I wanted to first thank the city manager for that additional clarification because that's accurate and consistent with my understanding of the process that we went forward with previously. And I very much appreciate the thoroughness of staff's report on this topic tonight and the very well-considered neutral tone that the report reflects. I also wanted to express appreciation for Councilmember Candel's candor and straightforward presentation about his interest in bringing this to our attention. There's absolutely nothing wrong, as the city manager's comment just a moment ago, with our revisiting this issue if it's in the interest of the community to do that. So I think it's time, if we can now, to kind of move on, because I'm sure we have lots of folks in the public that have something to say.
Okay, so if there's no further questions of the City Council at this time, we will move on to public comment. And I would like to acknowledge the 40 public comments that were received and are now posted in a timely manner by our city clerk on the online agenda so that you can see. I really appreciate the time people took to add that. I'll just go through these names. You're welcome to speak again, but I just want to acknowledge that we've received these and they've been sent to the council and read in advance before this meeting. So public, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Public comment, which is available for all to see and is on the website, has been received by, and these are last names, Rice, Fernandez, Dubin, Wakita, Jarity, representing the Marin Healthy Youth Partnership, Cutcliffe, Penn, Winter, McQuaid, Strauss, Mowbray, Simonian, Righty, Hillard, Hirsch, Pep, Fragakis, pardon me on that one, Chu, Kelfie, Rogers, Jameson, Mock, Grammer, Thompson, Casikis, Ritter, Ravazio, Munro, Pontius, Anderson, Haubolt, Walter, Glennon, Rubenstein, Leopold, Hooser, oh, this is a hard one, Casikis, Greenberg, and Kropp. So thank you very much for those letters, and they are available for everyone in the community to read also. So at this point, I would like to see how many people in the audience would like to speak on this matter. I see five hands raised, I believe, and I think we'll just go in the order in which they appear, Allison, on the screen. Is that all right with you? And
Thank you, yes.
it looks like we already have about 10 or 12, so I will set the timer at, well, looks like we still have more. Let's set the timer on 2 minutes, and just so that we can cover everyone, including others who have submitted letters. Does everyone feel comfortable with 2 minutes, or would you like 3? Council, you're okay with that? All right, please, Allison, would you introduce or bring in the first person? And what I'd really like to hear, I think the council it would be valuable information if you would state your name and whether you're a Larkspur resident or a Greenbrae resident.
Our first public comment is from caller ending in 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur.
Welcome,
For at least 8 reasons, pot stores should not be pursued. First, probably it's not best to undertake any major new programs at a time of pandemic lockdown when meetings are virtual and public attention is distracted. Procedure aside, is it really wise to undertake a whole new regulatory and enforcement program at a time of stretched budgets, reduced staff, and uncertain outlook? I've heard staff say enforcement is already a challenge, and there's no way to know whether fees and taxes will offset costs. Don't gamble in troubled times. Restraint is especially advisable regarding retail pot because the last time it came up, the room was packed with people objecting, and there's no reason to assume that has changed. Fourth, there's no pressing need for retail pot. Deliveries meet the demand, and as we know, use of mail order is much more frequent now, while retail stores struggle. Fifth, pot stores have a history of problems, prompting citizens to object to having them nearby, even if the citizens support legalization. Sixth, Larkspur has no isolated industrial areas where potentially problematic uses would be less likely to cause concern. Even our industrial areas have nearby mobile home park residences. Seventh, a related point is that we should not inflict on lower income areas or people what we ourselves would not want nearby. And finally, since most Marin cities still prohibit retail pot, allowing it here could lead to an undue concentration in Larkspur rather than having pot stores spread out evenly through the county. For all these reasons, please do not reopen the cannabis can of worms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I'd like to acknowledge your comment that this is really hard to do on Zoom. I agree. It's a difficult process for our community to engage in conversation this way, but we're struggling to try to engage. So I appreciate your patience on that. Looks like we have Tori Kropp. Tori, welcome.
I'm going to do my very best to be as professional as possible. Okay. But I'm going to tell you that I am ashamed of every single one of you. I am a long-term nurse in this community. I have a just 19-year-old son who was headed to Santa Barbara on a lacrosse scholarship, whom I found slumped on the floor dead from a fentanyl overdose less than 3 months ago, 18 months after he first smoked weed. There is an incredible drug problem in this county, and I'm listening to all of you not hearing it. Do you realize the fifth thing you talked about was our youth? The fifth thing. It was the budget, it was this and that, and then the fifth thing was our kids. Are we not responsible to take care of our children? Are we not? Those kids who are getting weed are getting Molly and Xanax and LSD and fentanyl. And if any of you think that weed for a 14-year-old is not a gateway drug, you are not paying attention. A 30-year-old smoking weed, go for it. A 14-year-old who gets to get 30 times the weed you might have smoked in high school is not okay. And if there's a dispensary in town, you know there are a whole bunch of kids who get their cards there. They get their cards and they get them to their friends. So I'm saying, a community, we have failed our children, our kids. I'm not sure you're paying attention. Mr. Candell, Mr. Woodruff, our children are dying. They are dying from suicides, from fentanyl overdoses. These are kids who were like AP kids in school. This isn't about, do I have my rights as a parent because I'd like to smoke weed and I want a dispensary? We have an obligation for our children, and we are failing them. So I am telling you that my son is everyone's son. And it's really easy to say, no, it was that kid. No, it wasn't. My kid was the honor student kid. And in 18 months after the first time he smoked weed, because he told me, Mom, the first time I smoked weed, I didn't hurt anymore. Kids don't use weed the same way adults do. They don't use it like drinking a beer at night. They use it because they're teenagers and they have pain. Yeah. And we are failing them. If we play this game.
Thank you, Tori. I appreciate
I understand, and I'm going to finish. Trust me. But we don't talk about budget before we talk about what do we care about in this county? What do we care about? Do we care about our kids? Because it certainly doesn't seem that some of us do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to say I'm so sorry, Tori, for your loss. And I share your concerns. My comments, our comments regarding budget, were focused on facts that were stated earlier. And I assure you, we all have children. We all care about our kids as deeply as you do.
Thank you, Tori. Another letter had come in which highlighted a few similar losses of young children in our community. So I'm sorry for your loss, Tori. That brings us to our next attendee with her hand up is Lori Dubin. Lori,
it's your turn for public comment.
Lori, you're welcome to speak, and I'd like the council to also acknowledge that Ms. Dubin sent in an email letter that's available for others in the community to read. Go ahead, Lori.
I've been a Larkspur resident for 21 years, and I'm against any cannabis businesses in Larkspur. I've got a cautionary tale illustrating just one of the many reasons why. About 11 years ago, I was alerted by a Tam Union High School District School Board member that two so-called medical marijuana dispensaries had fraudulently opened in Corte Madera at the same time. They were on Tamil Vista Boulevard, just off the bike path from Redwood, as close as you could get to the high school. Neither revealed in their business license applications that they were related to cannabis. Instead, they referred to natural healthcare products or herbal products. As a result, the town of Corte Madera was unaware as to their true nature, and they were granted business licenses. One of them, a storefront called Going Green, had a sandwich board sign placed on the bike path. At the time, my oldest son was a Redwood student, and the students were very aware, and many were very happy, that a dispensary had opened up so close to campus. I saw a kid once skateboard down the path during morning break to Going Green. He rang the doorbell, immediately was let in, picked up his supply, and then skateboarded back to school. When the town of Corte Madera learned that these dispensaries were in operation, they faced an uphill battle in shutting them down. Why? Because Scott Candell was the dispensary's lawyer. The second dispensary, Marin Holistic Solutions, inside a Tamil Plaza office building, had smartly locked up a 5-year lease. At first, Mr. Candell persuaded town officials that it would be better to work with him than against him. He drafted regulations that relaxed, for example, allowing an 18-year-old who could potentially be seniors from Redwood to work at the dispensary. When parents started showing up at town council meetings to express their concerns, the town did an about face and agreed that working with Mr. Candell was not a good idea, but it was too late because he threw every legal trick that he could, ultimately costing the Corte Madera town over $100,000 in legal fees. And the town had no choice but to settle their litigation for fear of incurring more legal costs. In short, Mr. Candell has been at this for a very long time. I urge the council, please don't allow cannabis to get a foothold in Larkspur because he will run with it. It won't be easy or cheap to go back. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for that. For the rest of the people in the audience, I'd appreciate you direct your comments on your concerns about cannabis to the council, and let's keep our council members' businesses and their entities aside, if that would be helpful. I do recognize that Lori Dubin also sent in a public comment, which is available to be read by everyone, which outlines some of her concerns.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Would it be appropriate, the facts mentioned by Ms. Dubin were not accurate. Would it be appropriate for me to address them at this point, or would you like me to wait till after?
Let's wait, because we have a lot of people in the audience who've been waiting patiently while we're engaging in this.
Okay. Thank you.
And I really appreciate their patience, because usually these meetings bring out a lot of people. So here we have Jeremiah Mock. Could you please introduce yourself, Jeremiah, and what city you live in?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I am a resident of Corte Madera. I live 5 minutes from downtown Larkspur, and I'm an associate professor at the University of California in San Francisco, and I specialize in tobacco control, and increasingly I work in the area of cannabis research and public health.
Welcome.
Thank you. I submitted a fairly lengthy explanation of my concerns. I want to highlight some things. I'd like to echo the earlier residents' comment. I think that if anything, the city of Larkspur and all of the other communities in Central and Southern Marin should be holding workshops on how to end the epidemic of youth cannabis use in Marin County, rather than having a discussion about revenue. And we can draw a straight line between the presence of cannabis businesses and the likely use of cannabis among youth based on more than 30 years of research on the tobacco industry and how the tobacco industry has consistently made extremely powerful efforts to have a retail presence. And the research shows very clearly that wherever there is a higher density of tobacco retail outlets, that there are much higher use rates of tobacco among youth. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that that association would not hold true in a community like Larkspur, especially given that students at our high schools can spend $20 to get a very convincing fake ID, and many of them can easily get cannabis cards. So I want to also say that there are studies that show that crime is a problem. It's not a problem immediately around dispensaries. It's in the neighboring communities. Those are the ones that are most impacted. That's due to the traffic that comes in and out of communities as people are casing surrounding neighborhoods like our neighborhood in Corte Madera. And so I urge you not to allow any cannabis businesses to operate in the city of Larkspur. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll refer the council and also the community to Dr. Mock's 2-page letter that he sent in, which is available on our website if you would like further reference and details that he provided. That brings us to Ron Strauss. Mr. Strauss, you're welcome to talk.
Yeah, hi. I'm Dr. Ron Strauss. I'm a medical doctor, former faculty at UC San Francisco, and have lived in Larkspur since 2005, where I still live with my wife, Kate, and our 3 children in the Larkspur Public Schools. We do not want or need a marijuana dispensary in the Larkspur city limits. It doesn't solve any problems. It only creates them. Any Larkspur resident who wants marijuana can have it delivered to his or her doorstep with same-day service. There's no access problem. The unfortunate scientific truth is that marijuana is clearly very dangerous for our kids. Data from the Lucille Packard Foundation shows that about 13% of Marin 11th graders use marijuana every day or every other day, and about 28% have used it in the past month. A study published in the American Journal of Public Health this year found a 10-fold increase in marijuana use among high school students between 1991 and 2017. According to a paper published this year in the Journal of the American Medical Association, vaping marijuana in the past 30 days among high schoolers nearly tripled between 2017 and 2019 from 4.9% to 14%. The marijuana industry has learned from the tobacco industry, as Dr. Mock pointed out, their remarkable success with hooking our youth, and has pursued similar strategies such as flavored or candy-like products and glamorous marketing campaigns. The American Academy of Pediatrics has expressed concern about what we're modeling when we open dispensaries, that we're telling children that this product belongs in our communities and is safe. And the wisest advice anyone ever gave me about parenting is to be careful what you model to your kids. They are watching very closely and will copy us for better or for worse. The marijuana industry already has an outsized presence in our children's lives. We don't need to make it even bigger. Please be the city council that continues to protect them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Strauss. And I acknowledge your letter that was sent in and is available for people to read on the website. That brings us to just the initials JK. Could you introduce yourself, JK?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Oh,
great.
Can you tell
us?
My
name is Jin. Of course. My name is Jinwoo Kim. I am a resident of Larkspur since 2001. We have a family, my wife and I, with 2 children in high school. One just graduated. Like the 2 previous gentlemen speakers, I too am a physician. I work at Kaiser in the city, and I'm an internal medicine doctor by training. The 2 people previous to me have already very eloquently stated the medical facts, so I don't want to belabor that point. I think I would just advise that we, as Dr. Anthony Fauci said, listen to the medical experts to help us get out of this situation as best as we can. But I'm impressed tonight by the previous speakers as well. The cautionary tales are certainly very concerning to me. You know, Marin is a wonderful place, but I think it's also a very challenging place for kids to navigate. It's a lot of wealth and a lot of access to things that are not good for them. And children's brains and young adults' brains are not fully developed well into their 20s. So I think that to think that the presence of a dispensary would not impact our youth locally, I think is misguided. Also misguided, I think, are the priorities that, like other previous speakers have mentioned, in terms of what is important here in our cities and what values are we trying to uphold, what messages are we sending intentionally or unintentionally to our community. Lastly, in this time of the pandemic where we have adapted and demonstrated that we can get by so well with deliveries and whatnot, I beg the question, what is the matter with the status quo? Mature, grown adults who are responsible, who wish to partake for recreational use, they are doing fine. And so I really don't see that a reason exists that we need to bring in a potentially very harmful industry into our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate you attending tonight. That brings us to Jessica Glennon. Jessica, are you unmuted? There you go.
Can you hear me?
Jessica.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Glennon. I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Council. I am the youth representative of Marin Healthy Youth Partnerships, as well as the fact that I'm a rising senior at Redwood High School. I am concerned about increasing access to cannabis in Marin, especially within our town that contains both a high school and a middle school with a collective student body of nearly 2,500. While only a small number of students go to the extent to create fake IDs in order to illegally purchase cannabis, the students that do this dispense their products like wildfire, getting people attached and hooked. And although the police are cracking down on more fake IDs as time goes on, I do not believe this will hinder cannabis usage, because most of the students that I know who use cannabis have access through their older siblings who are of legal age. It is only natural that younger siblings will follow along with what their older siblings are doing or sneak around the house and source their older siblings' products and share the cannabis they have with their friends during sleepovers and nights out and get-togethers. So the circumstances I am speaking of occur in the present, and I know that having dispensaries within our town, usage will be bolstered beyond control. I have a younger sister who is a rising 7th grader who speaks of her classmates making their own vapes using cannabis materials. This deeply concerns me and absolutely breaks my heart to know that people are already doing this. Marin has some of the highest rates of substance misuse in the state of California, and I wanted to acknowledge Ms. Kropp because I share similar sentiments. Just last week, I lost a family member to fentanyl overdose, and this cousin of mine initiated his drug use using marijuana. Please consider leaving the policies as they are, so the issues we already face as a community aren't further exacerbated.
Thank you, Jessica. It looks like next in line is ex-Councilmember and Mayor Larry Chu. Welcome, Larry. Welcome.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Mayor Way, members of the City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this matter. And you know I've submitted a letter of opposition, and I'm just going to highlight some key points. You know, when I was on the League of California Cities Public Safety Committee in 2015, we evaluated Prop 64 to make recommendations to the legislature. There was a strong desire to decriminalize marijuana, but most cities really didn't want those businesses in their communities. So when we have this statistic where staff reports always say that Marin has, 69+% approval, their sentiments are very similar. You know, the counties and the cities still don't have substantive support from their communities. And even in Larkspur, in the last 4 meetings we've had on this topic, vast majority of the people against this were residents of Larkspur. So if we do get any comments in favor of it and they're coming from outside the community, I believe this decision should reflect what our residents want. I also have no objection to marijuana use by responsible adults, but I believe cannabis operations within the city would negatively impact youth. In particular, if you look at the California Healthy Kids Survey, 69% of 9th graders and 86% of 11th graders at Redwood have stated that it's fairly easy or very easy to obtain alcohol and marijuana. In the past 30 days, a third of the 11th graders and 17% of 9th graders have admitted to using marijuana. When I was with the Twin Cities Coalition for Healthy Youth, we had identified 2 key strategies for reducing the use of alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and other drugs. One is to reduce access, and the other one is to delay the age of onset. Marin has some of the highest statewide metrics when it comes to underage youth, as well as the lowest age of onset. So we definitely have a problem here in this county. If you go back and ask Chief Cusimano, he also reported to the coalition at one point that there's a highly disproportionate number of medical marijuana cards that were issued to male youth compared to medication prescribed to the general population for the same medical conditions. There was mention of a 600-foot radius, and that is clearly inadequate. Students currently have a range where they're going to the downtown for takeout lunches, and that distance has not been a deterrent. I've always said that this should start at a half mile, which effectively makes this conversation a non-starter because the city is only 3¼ square miles. As far as the economic aspects.
Last comment, Larry, go ahead.
Okay, as far as the economic aspects, the economy will come back. Cannabis is a short-term financial solution, but we're exchanging that for long-term detriment to public health. So I urge the council to uphold Ordinance 1041 and prohibit cannabis activities in the city.
Thank you, Larry. And I'd like to refer members of the public who are still with us that he's also submitted a written comment, which is available for you to read on our website. That brings us to Linda Henn. Linda, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I too submitted a letter, so I'm not going to read it verbatim or anything, but I just, and there's been so many that are articulate and spoke so well about the key points, especially the medical community, the young people, and the parent who has suffered due to her child's initial use of marijuana. I live in a contiguous community. I live in Kent Woodlands, and mainly because I couldn't find a house in Larkspur, but I love Larkspur, and my daughter went to St. Pat's. But what I want to talk about is today. Today we are faced with a lot of problems created by COVID, the political issues and racial inequities. These are serious problems facing every community, and our schools are grappling with how and if to open. I feel it is a community problem that will require all of us to address this. There are several schools in Larkspur that will need help figuring out what to do, how to make our young people safe. I urge Larkspur to direct your attention to placing value on these issues. I do not think this is the time to be a deterrent in the paths of our community and young people. I thank you so much for considering this, but I also feel like we've talked about this for several years now, and I feel like every time we do it, we come to this conclusion that it's not right for Larkspur, and I hope you will continue that sentiment. And I hope you'll continue to place value on our young people and make decisions that will support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for attending and speaking. Cheryl, looks like you're next. I don't have a last name, but you can introduce yourself.
My name is Cheryl. I've lived in Larkspur for about 20 years. I also have a child in high school and I'm very aware of their prevalent drug use in the schools and that it's a problem. But I think that that's sort of almost the point, is that if kids want access to drugs, they're going to get it. They're actually much less likely to get it at a legalized business, similar to kids can't walk into a liquor store and buy liquor. I mean, of course they have fake IDs, those things happen, but I mean, I have no skin in the game. I don't use cannabis. I'm not trying to advocate for it. For me, it's more about the fact that the county voted overwhelmingly to legalize it, including Marin wanted to legalize it. So I don't understand why all of a sudden we're like, well, not in my backyard. And I think that's really what I object to, the fact that if people want access to it and it's legal, then we should allow that. I don't see, and then everybody keeps saying, well, but they can have it delivered. And in my mind, delivery is less likely to be scrutinized than somebody having to go in person and show their ID and have it dispensed that way. So anyway, I certainly, my heart goes out to the woman that spoke earlier who lost her son. I mean, I can't even imagine having to go through that. I do acknowledge that we have a drug problem, much like alcohol. I mean, it's education, right? And it's allowing people to be taught how to use things correctly. And so that's all I just wanted to say. I don't understand that, how the connecting the dots of putting a dispensary in all of a sudden means that's a direct line to kids getting drugs. I actually think it's the opposite. So
thank you, Cheryl, for attending tonight and providing your comment. It gives us, looks like Cindy Winter is up. Welcome, Cindy. Oh.
All right, now you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry if I'm redundant here. My computer went offline for about 10 minutes, so I may have missed something. But where is Dan Schwartz? I want him to hear this comment because he mentioned Hamilton Park. Hamilton Park is on South Eliseo Drive, where I have lived since 1983. I know the street well. There are a lot of seniors living on it. There are also a great many young families with school children. They're in the Kentfield School District, and that makes it a very desirable neighborhood to live in. Every school day, there are throngs of kids walking and cycling on South Eliseo to middle school. And then in the afternoon, they all come back, and there are teenagers living on that street too, a lot of them. And so I cannot imagine in my wildest dreams that South Elysium would accept a dispensary there, nor would it be a suitable place, because though it may be 600 feet away from a school, it's very conveniently connected to schools. So I hope that Dan Schwartz, he means well, but I hope he'll forget about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I know you live on that street, so. This last hand that's raised is Kelsey Fernandez. Welcome, Kelsey.
Welcome. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Mayor Way. Thank you so much to all the council members. I know you got my letter as well. I'm Kelsey Fernandez. I'm your neighbor right up the road in San Anselmo, and I do a lot of work with youth in Larkspur. And I just wanted to comment on the impact on youth and say it's a little discouraging to hear that a Google search was done to determine whether or not cannabis businesses had an impact on youth. I really, really, really urge this council to please read the letters that were written in. There's a lot of experts that have a lot of data that can inform this discussion. And I'm going to connect the dots. When it comes to the impact of commercial retail businesses on youth, the most solid facts that we have to work with come from what has been long established from decades of experience with the tobacco and the alcohol industries. And the research shows an association between alcohol and tobacco retailers and youth consumption. So the more presence of retailers, the higher the youth consumption. And there's many studies that have been shown this across the US, including California. So we can infer the same thing for a cannabis outlet. And allowing a retail portal for the cannabis industry to have a presence in Larkspur is ignoring what we know. There is a fundamental principle of environmental science called the precautionary principle. And that states that when an activity raises threat of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established. And so I just want to say, I'm going to take probably another 10 seconds if I could. I just want to say that allowing cannabis businesses in Larkspur will send a clear message to youth that the elected officials and other adults approve of cannabis, and so should they. And there is absolutely no ethical justification for the city of Larkspur or any other community in Marin to trade tax revenue and profits for the health of their community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey, for your comments. Allison, I don't see any other hands raised.
There's one emailed comment, otherwise there's no further hands.
All right, while Allison reads the email comment, I'll recognize any more hands that are arise during that time. So go ahead, Allison, read the email comment.
All right, this comes from Joe Jennings. My name is Joe Jennings, 208 Monte Vista Avenue, Larkspur, and I'm not taking a position on retail cannabis sales. My concern is that the city takes seriously the multi-year impact of our economic recession and COVID-19 pandemic. The city needs to do a thoughtful review of all potential new revenue sources and take the time to evaluate the trade-offs with appropriate public input and discussion. This would make it possible to have additional sources of revenue for the city's 2021-22 budget next spring. Thank you for your time and attention to the problem of declining revenue to fund essential government services in Larkspur. End of comment.
All right, and I'll give people who are on the online Zoom meeting one more chance to raise their hand if they haven't already spoken. I see no one, so I'd like to thank everyone who's participated and all the 40 emails that came in public comment prior to this meeting that are available for the public to read. So at this point, I will close public comment and bring this back to the City Council. Let's begin with asking any clarifying questions to the City Manager about any of the comments. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dan, I have a question. People brought up things data definitely exists. So people, and I appreciate everybody's comments and their concerns, and that was actually what I was hoping for at this workshop. And the concerns, for example, many people feel convinced that if you open a dispensary, teen use is going to go up. And people are drawing that conclusion based on what happened with alcohol, based on what happened with tobacco. Being that cannabis has been legal for 20 years, I believe there are statistics out there where we can find out if you open a dispensary, does teen use go up in that community? And my question for you is, if we as a council wanted to find out the facts, whether that was true or not, is that something you would feel comfortable looking into? And do you have any idea how much time that would take? Because I mean, I think in order for us to make a decision, we really have to understand what the real facts are and try not to make this an emotional decision, but a factual decision.
I certainly feel comfortable that we could collect information and data in short order if that's something that you want us to collect. Speaking to various comments that were made by the public, you know, there's first of all, there's two sets of data. There's data that goes back to the legalization of medical marijuana, and there would be data, there'd be less data, but there'd be some data out there about the legalization of recreational use. And so I think we'd want to try to collect information in both those categories. One speaker talked about inference, and I don't know if I wasn't clear enough in my presentation. I was only speaking very specifically to data that would be directly indicating a relationship between cannabis industry and crime. You know, we wouldn't get into analysis of inference. That would be something that folks could submit for your consideration there.
But I think before we get into whether we're going to have our city staff do more investigation into this matter and collecting data from other cities, I think we need to discuss what the temperament and the overall sentiment has been from the speakers tonight and from the 40 additional letters that were received. There seem to be some uniform themes through there. It appears that the themes were really consistent with what we've heard before. So can we start with thinking about what those themes were? Gabe, you had your hand up and then you went dark, so.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on what I heard, and I think the issues that are emerging for me. As far as, you know, the community, I think we had close to 50 comments, and I've reached out and tried to engage with some of the people. It seems overwhelmingly nobody was opposing Prop 64 legalization or access. The comments are entirely about youth safety, or almost entirely about youth safety, and that really is first and paramount for me. I would hope that the council can prioritize that issue before revenue. I almost feel that the comments of Ms. Kropp and Dr. Mock would encourage me to form an ad hoc committee really looking at reducing the disproportionate amount of drug use independent of dispensaries. You know, I almost feel like a tangential, you know, concern came up for me, which is, you know, to the heart of what goes on at Redwood and the special schools in the whole TAM Union District. So I only want to say one last comment. I've really tried to dig into the research. And one thing I would ask of the city manager is, you know, one of the most convincing studies I read was from San Diego. It's Sheehan Cummins in 2017, and it sampled 46,000 students. My request to the city manager is to really localize these studies, because Larkspur has a unique income, a unique culture, a unique size, many unique characteristics where I'm not sure when we say data-driven, we're going to get any better information than the 50 comments we just received, because there's a highly localized aspect to this problem. Thank you. I yield.
So Dan Hilmer, you had raised your hand on, it looks like on the online portal there. What are your thoughts about how we should direct this conversation?
I believe Vice Mayor Haraf had his hand up before I did.
Ah.
Well, you can still go if you'd want.
I'm sure I'll learn a lot from your informed opinion.
Actually, not so much. First of all, I want to again express appreciation to everybody who has taken the time to submit written comments and to appear here tonight. We've been down this road before a couple of times, and I'm very sympathetic to the sentiments that I have heard tonight and have heard time and time again when this issue has been presented to our city council, which led us to first approve the interim measure that we adopted, and then to confirm that interim measure again last year. I see no reason to be revisiting this issue at this time. I appreciate the interest of some to view this as an opportunity to enhance our revenue stream, but it has been consistently clear to me for years that there is no public sentiment to go beyond what we've already adopted as our ordinance. And I am frustrated that we're sitting here again tonight, going back and having folks come out and repeat the same words that they've said on multiple occasions in opposition to a more liberal approach to cannabis in our community. So I'm, we can, if we decide as a council, to ask our city manager and staff to spend more time in exploring developing additional data that would only support an approach that I think there is no interest in our community to pursuing. So I think it's a waste of time. And I would oppose any action that would take us down that road. We've done this before. I think we're done. And I'm not enthusiastic at all for seeing staff spending more time on this issue, for the council spending more time on this issue, and for our community spending more time on this issue. We have better things to do. We do have certainly budgetary constraints that we need to deal with, but we cannot solve those budgetary constraints by adopting policies that the community does not support. We'll have to figure out some other way. So just to reiterate, I think we're done with this issue, and I would be very much opposed to seeing it pursued further.
Thank you, Kevin.
Mayor, can I ask Kevin a quick question?
Hold on, I think Dan Hilmer was next. Yeah.
I'm happy to allow Councilmember Kendall to ask Vice Mayor Haraf a question.
And then you come up next, please.
Yes.
I'd like to hear your opinion. Go ahead, Scott.
I guess my question is, I understand the sentiment of everybody we heard. Given 50 people equal 0.4% of the Larkspur community, I understand this particular subset of the Larkspur community feels very strongly and probably comes out to every time this issue is raised. If you feel that the majority of the Larkspur community is not in favor of this, I happen to disagree with that, and I would not be against putting it on the ballot because I think then you get a much more equitable representation of what the Larkspur community actually wants. And I was curious what your feelings would be for that.
Well, how do you describe putting it on the ballot? First of all, it's too late for November, but how would you describe putting that on the ballot? I mean,
I would actually defer that. I defer that to city manager. That was one of the suggestions that he made, I think, in his presentation. But I think that's probably the most equitable way to hear from the citizens of Larkspur, as opposed to, you know, the vocal minority that happens to show up at a council meeting.
But putting it on a ballot would also mean that there had to be a consensus of the council members to put it on the ballot. If I understand
Agreed.
measures, they would have to be voted on and approved that we would be affirmatively engaged with putting a ballot measure on. And at this point, I don't sense the sentiment that we even want to go further in this matter as a whole. But do you want to clarify that, Dan Schwartz? How would we, a ballot measure work if the county, if the city decided, I mean, there's extensive costs involved with that, I know, in polling, et cetera. So you want to speak to that? Or too early?
Well, the matter of putting anything on the ballot, any question that you want to place on the ballot is the council going through the public hearing process to draft up what that ballot measure is, and then doing it in a timetable that allows it to reach whichever ballot you've designated you want it to land on. What I referred to in the presentation is we noticed that some communities, and looks like most recently Yountville and American Canyon and Napa County, are after sort of doing some exploration of this topic, they've decided to let the voters decide. So they've put the measure on the ballot where it's structured in a way that it asks if you want the cannabis retail industry legalized in the community, and then it also says if you do that, would you approve this excise tax? And so I haven't engaged those communities to find out whether they did polling or simply decided to use the ballot as polling, which is always an option that you have as well, is to just see what happens. Regardless, though, there is a cost to being on the ballot. And depending on which ballot you choose actually dictates that cost, because it's a combination of the number of issues and entities that the cost is being spread across as you distribute the ballot out into the community. So if you pick an election with a lot of things on it, cost is lower than if you pick an election where we're the only thing on the ballot. It's hard for me to tell you what that number would be, but it would likely be, you know, in the low tens of thousands, like 20, 30, 40,000, up to 80,000, depending on what ballot you were to pick. And I'm not going to put the city clerk on the spot, but I'm sure I can have her research better what the going cost is, if that's something the council gets interested in.
So thank you. Dan Hilmer, would you like to weigh in on this, since you've been listening to this comments for a while?
Well, I appreciate the discussion. To be quick about it, I agree with everything Kevin Harrow said. I think we're done with this. I don't think we need to revisit it. I don't want to spend staff resources on it. And I'd like to move on to do better things.
Okay. Gabe Paulson, anything else to add?
I'll just repeat that I know we're in a cannabis workshop, but it's really occurred to me that if we use city resources, I'd like to apply them more towards youth addiction. I think, you know, the issue of revenue and increasing access to cannabis is far outweighed by what I see as a growing problem of youth addiction. Whether or not it's correlated to dispensaries, I don't really care to you know, just. I got into the city council for public safety, you know, working with fires, working with the mobile home people. I really feel that 2,500 young people, I'd like to work to protect and put time into that.
That seems like the sentiment of a lot of the letters, the emails, and the callers too. So do we have any other further comment, Councilmember Candell?
No, ma'am.
So it sounds like listening to the comments of the community and the emails of the community and the consensus of at least 3 council members, myself, Vice Mayor, and Councilmember Hilmer, and I would think that Gabe Paulson leads in this direction too, is that we understand that the community at this point is not interested in changing our current ordinance that prohibits cannabis retail business within the city and jurisdiction of Larkspur, and maintains the status quo, which is the existing legislation that we affirmed in September of 2019. Do I have consensus from at least 3 of you that that's where we are? Or 4 of you or 5 of you? Just raise your hand. Looks like I have 4 of us. At this point, it means that we don't agree to engage the city staff, city manager, or our city attorney in any further investigation into opening the ramifications of opening a retail cannabis store. Is that correct? Nod your head if it's correct, if that's the consensus by the majority of the 5-member council. And that looks like that was one of the options for the directions to staff, was to leave the status quo or to engage in further process. Does that sound like a direction that you can take, City Manager Dan Schwartz?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Hara, for articulating that very well. Are there other further comments by the City Council on this workshop matter? All right, and I once again, for those in the audience, would like to thank you for participating in this and for sending in your very thoughtful comments. I recognize that this is a very emotional and striking situation, and it's very hard to do this in a COVID-19 environment as well as a online Zoom platform. So really appreciate your attendance. You're welcome to continue to send in further comments that you would find valuable for the council to read about. And it looks like Vice Mayor Hoff had one final comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Catherine, for leading this meeting in a very thoughtful and respectful way to all participants. I think it reflects well both on the council and our community that we can engage in these conversations in a civil and productive way. So thank you.
All right, and to our local residents who are still in the audience, you're welcome to stick with us. And I really appreciated many of your heartfelt comments about how you would like our city to focus on issues involving youth and prioritizing the health and safety of our families and communities. So that closes item 8.1. That brings us to item 8.2, which is an update on city activities in response to COVID-19.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, we were although we were certainly wondering what the governor might do and certainly anticipating some restrictions being placed, we weren't sure exactly what those would look like until they happened on Monday afternoon. But after carefully researching and looking at the directive, we think that all city operations can continue under the new orders, and we've confirmed with the county that we can continue as planned. So we will continue to offer our library services as curbside pickup, and we're rapidly in the COVID world, so what's that in real time anymore? We are making our way toward reaching a point where we'll be able to allow one individual in at a time to do some browsing. We're making some physical modifications to the space so that will be possible in a very controlled and safe circumstance. We're also getting close to being able to take people on a one-at-a-time basis who have reason to come into the second floor to review records of the planning and building department. I really want to acknowledge the heavy lifting going on in the planning and building department to rapidly make their operation digital. It's not easy to do a process we had mapped out to take place over 3 years in the span of 3 months, but they've made incredible progress in that regard and are continuing to work on it. And we actually think there's this good chance that when all is said and done, most of the department can operate online or digitally, which is a big change for us. Want to remind folks that are seeing the camp activity out in the out in Piper Park, that is authorized under the public health orders, and we've been working with camp directors to make sure they're following all the guidelines. Folks who have concerns are welcome to contact me and raise those issues with me so that I'm aware of what your concerns are, and if need be, I can talk to the camp managers about what is going on. But generally, what we're finding is that the kids are being respectful when they're in their activities in terms of what the guidelines are for the activities that they're supposed to be, or that they're engaged in. And with that, Madam Mayor, we just continue to proceed along. I did want to note that the MCCMC committee that Council members, Vice Mayor Haroff and Council Member Paulson sit on is looking at doing a collective purchase of masks, of the basic surgical looking mask, the one-time use mask, a bulk purchase, and then we'd have those available for our staff, our police officers, for our fire personnel to hand out when they're out in the community. And particularly if they see somebody who isn't wearing a mask, it's just an opportunity to engage them positively and hand them a mask, remind them what the mask means, how important it is to staying safe. So we're going to participate in that purchase, as are, I think, all of the agencies in Marin County. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
I think that's an excellent idea. My daughter, who lives in New York City, all the police officers are walking around carrying stacks of one-time use masks, and it's a real giveaway incentive for people to use them. And it's a way for law enforcement also to be present in the community. So I think it's a fabulous idea. Any questions of that COVID-19 update? Yes, Kevin?
I just wanted to express compliments and appreciation for the folks in the planning and building department who have been working under difficult circumstances, as has all of city staff. But I know from personal experience that they are being as responsive as they possibly could be under the circumstances and working hard to continue to do their work. And I think it's just terrific.
Can you elaborate a little on the outdoor dining for restaurants? Are we still engaged in looking at them unit by unit?
Yes, so we've had 2 restaurants contact us since indoor dining was rolled back, and we have a general plan of action for one of the restaurants so that they'll actually be able to move some dining into parking spaces adjacent to their restaurant that we think we can work with the restaurant to make it a safe situation. And then we anticipate tomorrow or Friday we'll sit down with the other restaurants to see what's possible. You know, most of the outdoor dining interest is in our Magnolia corridor because a lot of constraints for those properties. A lot of our restaurants in other parts of town have parking lots and plazas that are presenting them with outdoor dining opportunities. But if you come to our downtown corridor and our Magnolia area, you'll see there's not as many opportunities. So looking at the parking spaces is one option that we're exploring now.
All right, thank you. Any questions on that item from, any questions from the audience on that item, which is about update on city's response to COVID-19? And then our last item for the night is a financial update on anything that you need to brief the council on in regards to financial budget implications of COVID-19.
So I just wanted to follow up on some preliminary comments I had at the last meeting. We've gotten more information about how CARES Act money might flow to the city. It looks like Larkspur will be eligible for up to $151,000 to offset our costs to deal with the COVID-19 situation. So the way the governor set up the program, because the governor gets to administer the money it comes from the federal government to the state and then down to the jurisdictions, is the money will be paid in 6 installments. and he's holding out as an incentive that working hard to maintain his orders and directives and to pursue the public health is how he's going to measure whether you qualify for these payments. In addition to the fact that you've expended money on COVID issues, I feel comfortable and confident that we in Marin are doing all we're supposed to be doing. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be receiving all of our payments as we go forward. We're still documenting feverishly everything that we've spent to date. Essentially, this is to cover anything unbudgeted that that we can deal with. So that was my main thing I wanted to update the council on this time.
Okay. Are there questions on that? All right, seeing none, thank you all for participating tonight. And for those in the audience who are still with us, thank you for being here. Hopefully one of these days we'll be together in person. But till now, our next city council meeting is, I believe, August 5th, which is Wednesday, is that 5th or 6th? August 5th, on Zoom at 6:30. And we look forward to continuing to discuss issues of importance to Larkspur. So at that, I will take a motion for adjournment.
I'll move.
Councilmember Hilmer and
I'll second. I'll second.
Beat you to that one. Yep. Gabe beat you to that.
Oh. Gabe's always beating me to these things.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And, I look forward to seeing everybody around the neighborhood.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.